There's actually a biology of attachment. So just like there's a biology of trauma, there is a biology of attachment. And what exactly is attachment? After you take the 21-day journey, then it opens up the biology of trauma modules for you. And one of those modules that I teach is the biology of attachment and neurodevelopment. Neurodevelopment and attachment are things that happen in early life, and they either will generate a secure attachment, meaning your nervous system, your operating system, your programming for life, for relationships, for your health is either one of security and safety, or guess what? Of trauma, fear, and disease. So what is attachment? It is the combination of attunement, which is the nonverbal communication and attention that a primary caregiver has with their infant. We're talking about really early life, not pre-verbal. So that nonverbal communication and responsiveness, we call that attunement. And the degree of autonomic regulation. So again, these words of regulation of our autonomic nervous system, not necessarily just of our central nervous system, which is our brain, but our autonomic nervous system. So that vagus nerve, that sympathetic nerve chain that runs our operating system. So how regulated are we coming out of early childhood? And what was the degree of attunement? That is what will generate, that is what will result in our attachment style, whether one of insecure attachment, and if it's insecure, what type, which one of the insecure attachment styles, or are we coming out of childhood with a secure attachment? There are biology factors, meaning that there are biology factors, some of them are genetic, some of them are not genetic, but they're still biological, that impact your attachment style. So that no matter how much therapy or how much trauma work you're doing, you're still noticing yourself in that place of sensitivity, reactivity, and insecurity. So on this important topic of attachment style and attachment trauma, I am so happy to bring my friend, my good friend and colleague, Dr. Diane Poole Heller. So what have you seen that the different attachment styles do differently in order to help regulate their autonomic nervous system?
That's a really great question. I think really helpful information for all of us to have. First of all, we regulate really deeply through connection with other people, right? That's one of the fastest ways we can regulate is having the touch of a safe friend or, calling somebody up when we're stressed. I mean, social connection is a really big part of how we safely and easily regulate our nervous systems. We're biologically oriented to connection. So when connection is a little bit disturbed by early attachment deficits or whatever the environment did or didn't provide, that will sometimes affect how we are able to access healthy relationship, like secure attachment people in our lives, and actually receive that connection that helps us regulate, or if we're in a relationship with someone else that has insecure attachment, how we might actually dysregulate each other. When we move and adapt away from secure attachment due to maybe birth trauma, it's not always caretaking, sometimes it's medical, or our temperament, or just what our parents were able to do or not do in caregiving. When we move away in the direction of avoidant attachment, that's called avoidant for when we're kids, and it's called dismissive when we're adults. We tend to prefer being isolated because we didn't really experience the relationship as nourishing. It was either kind of rejecting or nobody was home, no presence there. And for an infant to reach out to connect for nourishment, and they have the experience of their caregiver being dissociated or just not there, that's very frightening. So the child starts to build an internal working model, internal sense of attachment, as it's really not very nourishing to have another person. It's actually disturbing. So they start to be self-reliant before we're actually able to be self-reliant. It's not possible for infants to be self-reliant. And that's called moving towards avoidant attachment. I'm giving you kind of the brief overview here. And what will happen in terms of nervous system regulation is the child will try to do it themselves. So try not to rely on this biologically determined need for connection, which is a biological thing, just like getting hungry for food. When you're self-regulated, you can feel your body, you can feel stress release. You can feel your tissues and your bones. Like right now, as you're listening, you can see if you feel your feet on the floor or your seat on the chair. Notice if you're feeling warm or cold, or maybe there's a little tension in your neck and you feel more relaxed in your feet. There's sort of different exercises you can do to strengthen your awareness. And that's something that someone with avoidant attachment might have more of a struggle with. They have a little bit harder time connecting to other people because their early template or blueprint is that other people aren't nourishing, or they're neglectful, or they're actually painful because they're rejecting. So they tend to have a sort of a defense against that. Doesn't mean they don't have friends, but they will have a lot more hesitation sometimes to reach out for a need or to really co-regulate. So they tend to do this auto-regulation, which is more like somewhat disembodied, or you could almost call it dissociative. I mean, you really can't call it dissociative, actually. So we want to move from dissociation back to embodiment. The way that person will regulate their nervous system from an ambivalent point of view is they tend to over-focus on the other person. They have the blueprint installed in unconscious memory that the only way they can regulate is that the other person regulates them. So think about that. That's going to put a lot of pressure on friends or the therapist, if you're a therapist, or especially your relationship partner when you're in a relationship, to do it for you. Like you have to have them hug you. You have to have them calm you down. You have to have them talk to you immediately when you're activated. That puts a lot of pressure on the other person. And so often what happens, it's really heartbreaking, is that a person that's stuck, a lot in ambivalent attachment, again, you can have a mix or a little bit or a lot, they will put so much pressure on the other person to keep reassuring them and to keep regulating them that they often push the person they love the most away, because the person just is like, it's never enough. And the feeling actually is on the person that has the ambivalent attachment, it never feels like enough because it keeps getting fueled by their history, and they keep reverting to that original wound of I'm going to get dropped. One of the things I just read was that avoidant attachment is often linked to eating disorders, because you think about it, it's a lack of nourishment. They aren't able to take nourishment relationally because it was either the person was gone, like nobody's home, which is terrifying to an infant, or the person was actively hateful, looked at them with hate, was rejecting, had a negative, really negative energy, or angry all the time or something like that. So that makes sense to me that they might have trouble with eating disorders because they have an issue with nourishment, relational nourishment. So that can get transferred to food. Makes total sense to me why that might be a link health-wise. So I just wanted to mention that while we're talking about it.
Yeah, and I can see all forms of eating disorders, right? Because some will, and maybe this is more of the preoccupied or the ambivalent, where they may go into more binge eating where they never feel like it's enough. And maybe the avoidant, it can tend to have more of that control around anorexia, and I'm not going to even let the nourishment in. Be fascinating to look deeper into that.
Yeah, because you look into bulimia, you're not letting the nourishment in either because you're regurgitating it, so it's interesting. I think there's a lot of correlation in my mind anyway with ambivalent to addiction, because you're sort of addicted to an external reinforcement. And you're trying to regulate externally. So if people are disappointing you and you're expecting people to drop you, right, then you can go to substances, alcohol, drugs, exactly like you said with food. It has a similar, like, trying to get it from the outside versus learning how to regulate inside your body, right?
And yet even with that, I see the same cycle repeating itself as what happens in the relationships, because that substance, whatever it is, will only last for so long. And so then they experientially have that same sequence happening where I feel good now, but the next thing that happens, it's going to drop me.
Right.
And of course that is going to happen when you're using an external substance or a person in order to give you that sense of regulation.
The nervous system's all over the place because it'll spike up into too much sympathetic when they're overactivated into the ambivalent part, and that'll bring panic attacks or rage outbursts or, excessive overactivation, feeling electrical in your body perhaps. And then it'll drop all the way into overactivated parasympathetic, or if you think of Stephen Porges's polyvagal work, it'd be dorsal vagal response. So safety is super important when working with disorganized attachment, because safety's been so off the table. And so often people have not had really feel like they ever felt safe. I mean, it's hard to imagine, so when's the first time you felt safe? And they said, I don't think I even know what that is, because they've been raised with emotional abuse or sexual abuse or ongoing physical abuse or physical and emotional neglect. Also causes the nervous system just needs a lot of learning how to go into this sort of range of resiliency, and I think Dan Siegel calls it window of tolerance, to start to learn how to manage those arcs when it goes too much sympathetic, to like calm that panic down, and so it comes back within that what I call range of resiliency. And then also how to lift the brake on the attachment system and the nervous system to deal with the too much parasympathetic that goes down into the depression or the disconnection or the digestion problems and the lethargy. And that you don't go all the way in, you just go a little bit below and then keep lifting the brake to bring the aliveness back. And not that you want to keep the range of resiliency consistent. You eventually, I don't know how to do this backwards, but you eventually want to widen it, so that you have this much starting out maybe, and then you want to keep growing it, that resiliency in the body and in the ability to be in a relational field over time. And it's definitely buildable. It's like working out your muscles. You can work out your nervous system and increase your range of resiliency really in an amazing amount, and that includes boundary work and all sorts of the somatic work. But also I think what needs to happen with it is the relational work.